Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end of life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Today, we're talking with Lowrey Brown, the Exit Guide Program Director at Final Exit Network. Final Exit Network is an organization dedicated to providing information, education, and emotional support to those who've a terminal illness and are considering their end of life options. They advocate for choice in dying and offer guidance to those who seek to define their final chapter on their own terms, emphasizing autonomy and self-determination. Before we start, I want to acknowledge the sensitivity of today's topic. We'll be discussing end-of-life choices, self-deliverance, and the complex emotions surrounding the decisions to end one's life in the face of a terminal illness. This content may be triggering for some, so please take care of yourself and consider what's best for you as we proceed. Our aim today is not only to talk about what Final Exit Network does, but also to explore the broader questions of dignity, autonomy, and compassion at life's end. We hope to offer understanding, support, and perhaps some comfort to anyone navigating these profound decisions. Lowrey, welcome, and thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Really, thanks so much for having me.
Can you start off and tell our listeners about your journey to becoming an advocate at Final Exit?
Sure. I actually was blessed with parents who had always considered quality over quantity when it came to end of life choices. They had seen their relatives have rough endings. I believe the Nancy Cruzan case also had a large impact on them. So they had my brother and me signing an advance directive, I think at the tender age of 16 or so. So I grew up with that, and, even through life, just appreciated that outward appearance and inward experience, can be very different, and knowing that how one experiences the world is very much an internal thing. And so when Final Exit Network was having a training for volunteers in 2016, I thought, I wanna do that, and, I have never looked back.
Wonderful. Now, who does Final Exit Network support and how do they support them? Many of our listeners do not know about Final Exit yet.
Sure. So Final Exit Network, the larger organization, hopefully we serve everybody who wants any information about choice in dying or how to control their own death if and when they want to do that. As you said, I am the director of the Exit Guide program, which is probably the program that Final Exit Network is best known for. And the Exit Guide program provides education and a compassionate presence to competent adults who are faced with intractable suffering from one or more medical conditions that can reasonably be understood to seriously impair quality of life. You did mention earlier that we support people who have terminal illnesses, which we do, but we will also support people whose illnesses are not necessarily terminal. So we will work with individuals who are faced with dementia or neurodegenerative diseases or other illnesses that can destroy quality of life, but don't necessarily end life quickly.
Before we go on and we talk further and get into some details, can you explain the concept of self-deliverance? Because we'll be mentioning that a bit.
A good thing to clarify because it's something I take so for granted in my work. Um, Self-deliverance is, I think, a broad umbrella term for choosing to end one's own life at a time that seems appropriate to the individual in question and not descending into a future, whether that's a future of dementia or a future of severe incapacitation, that one doesn't find to be acceptable, a condition in which one can't contribute or participate in ways that one finds meaningful. It's a way of concluding one's life at a time that feels appropriate rather than dragging out to the bitter end.
So I read Final Exit 2020 was in my library, and it's not an easy book to read. It goes into a lot of detail about the different paths people might consider if they wish to hasten their death. Do you feel comfortable talking about that a little bit?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, that is precisely what we talk about. And there's good news and bad news. There are a number of different paths that one can take if one is interested in hastening one's death. That's the good news. The bad news is that none of them are easy. Um, Society, the medical system, all of these things are set up to prolong life, no matter the quality, no matter what. So anybody who wishes to conclude their lives early is going to be swimming upstream. The first path that I like to mention that I think everybody kind of knows about, but doesn't really know about or doesn't think about so actively is medical choices. Um, One can make medical choices that will actively hasten one's own death. It's perfectly legal. People have advanced directives. Everybody knows this. And yet, when the time comes, it's often hard for friends and family, especially if others are making medical decisions for you at that point, to shift their thinking. Because, for all of our lives, loving somebody means providing care, providing cures, providing health. So, if you're looking into the future and thinking there might be conditions that you find unacceptable, it's really important to educate your close loved ones, in particular your healthcare representative, about the kinds of conditions in which you would not want to live. And then also, it sounds a little weird. You'd think that that statement would be sort of obvious, but it's really important to educate them that they need to make choices that will cause your death. Because I think that's a very hard mental shift for loved ones to make. Even if they know you don't want to live like this, it seems to be a really big jump to, oh, how do I instruct the doctor to make sure that they don't get antibiotics, that this isn't treated, that they've just kept comfortable? So that's one thing to keep in mind, particularly as you educate your loved ones about what you want. Another tool in the toolbox for considering hastening one's death is voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. Yeah, this is a method of self-deliverance that's been getting a lot more traction recently. People are talking about it. Often when I bring it up, people's initial knee-jerk reaction is, oh, that sounds terrible. It doesn't have to be. It can be a very peaceful, comfortable method of self-deliverance. Like anything, it has its upsides and downsides. I think a lot of people appreciate this path to self-deliverance because it gives people a little bit more time. It's a slower transition. It feels like a gentler transition. There's time to talk to loved ones. There's time to say goodbyes. The dying process is extended a little bit. There's time for bonding with the dying individual and loved ones, as well as between the loved ones themselves. It really brings people together. Um, I think also for some people, it feels a little bit more natural than other methods of hastening death that are faster. Some of the downsides to voluntarily stopping eating and drinking are that it takes a little while. Some people don't want that slower transition time. It is also very much a team sport. It is not something that you can do alone. You will need palliative care to keep you comfortable because you will start experiencing symptoms of dehydration and things like that. So you absolutely have to have palliative care and having loved ones also just to provide personal care throughout the transition. I think on average for somebody who's reasonably well hydrated takes maybe 10 to 14 days. So another big advantage of voluntarily stopping eating and drinking to keep in mind is that it is often the method of self-deliverance of last resort because all you have to do is stop. So I would say make friends with voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. Know it's there because it may be the only path that's open to you. Another path in this country is medical aid in dying. And actually, that's an international path as well. But as many of your listeners may know, there's a number of states in this country that have death with dignity laws. Two of those states, Oregon and Vermont, have dropped their residency requirement. So anyone anywhere in the country, at least in theory, could travel to Oregon and Vermont for medical aid in dying. There's logistical issues there, and anybody who's planning that, everything needs to happen in that state. You have to plan to die in that state, all of those things. The laws are great. We've fully encouraged people to take advantage of them. But in this country, medical aid in dying is restricted to individuals who A, have a terminal illness, and B, are within 6 months of death. So there's a lot of people who don't fit into that category, but if you do, that's a great option. If you don't fit into that category, medical aid in dying is also available in Switzerland. Their laws about assisting in a death are much more compassionate than they are in this country. So individuals, say, who are faced with dementia, or even individuals sort of at end of life who are feeling very debilitated, they know they're not going to get stronger, their friends are dying, they're done with life, they would also probably qualify for medical aid in dying in Switzerland. Um, the downsides there are, of course, travel. You got to get there. And usually at the end of life, it's not the time you feel like a transcontinental flight and hopping over the ocean. It's also pretty expensive. So it's not something for someone, unfortunately, who's on a tight budget. Another path is what I'm going to call the do it yourself methods. So, as I said, in this country, um, medical aid in dying is quite restricted. So, for somebody who doesn't qualify for medical aid in dying, there are a number of methods of self deliverance, such as the inert gas method of self deliverance, which is the one that the Exit Guide program teaches. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. That people can choose to comfortably and safely hasten their own death. There's a couple of books on our website. One of them that you mentioned, Final Exit 2020, and also the Peaceful Pill Handbook. The Peaceful Pill Handbook is a good bit more expensive, but it has a lot of different methods in it. Again, none of them are easy, but if you subscribe to the online version, it's got videos and things. So it is doable, but not easy. And then finally, there's the Exit Guide program of Final Exit Network. So for people who would like a little bit more proverbial hand-holding, um, if you do suffer from an intractable illness and would like Exit Guide support to help walk you through all of the steps, like planning a self-deliverance soup to nuts, which, as it turns out, is a lot of planning, then our Exit Guide program is there to support people in that.
It's interesting you went through all of these different options, and many of them are cost prohibitive. Many of them are cost prohibitive. Sorry, I'm having a moment. Okay, so many of them, many people can't do them because they don't have the funds. It's expensive. Even in states like California, where medical aid in dying is legal, it costs at least $4,000 because you have to pay for not only the medicine, but you have to pay for the doctors. This isn't covered under insurance. And so it's can get expensive, and then you have those states that you can't do medical aid in dying, and then you talk about you do talk about stopping VSEDs, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, which takes a while. And I'm glad that you mentioned that you do. You need a team, because, as an example, you get so weak, if you get up, you could pass out or fall over. You do need people, but so I'm glad that you mentioned these other options that people have, and it's unfortunate that it is. We have to think about cost in with something like this.
It should not be a barrier.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you brought that up. I would say that the services that we provide are free of charge. Unfortunately, because of laws in this country that prohibit physical assistance in a suicide with legal parlance, we can't provide the equipment.
Yeah.
So individuals working with the Exit Guide program, or who are doing do it yourself, would have to purchase the equipment. It's probably in the $300 to $500 range. But still, there's people we've worked with clients who have to go paycheck to paycheck and get bits and pieces at a time because they can't get it all at once.
Should people think differently about the different paths that you mentioned if they're faced with immobilizing or cognitive degenerating diseases like ALS, MS, dementia?
Good question. Yes. So as I said, none of the paths are easy, and they all have their sort of guide rails. When you're thinking about medical aid in dying in this country, medical aid in dying has to be administered somewhere in the digestive tract. So in this country, doctors are not allowed to use a vein. So in thinking about taking advantage of medical aid in dying in this country, you have to be able to do the very last step of administration. So there's oral, they can use peg tubes, I think they can use feeding tubes, there's also rectal administration, but you have to be able to either push the plunger or swallow, and your digestive tract needs to be in good enough shape that it can absorb the medication. So ironically, the sicker you are, the longer it can take to die, because your system isn't processing the medications as fast as they might otherwise. For do-it-yourself methods and for working with Final Exit Network, because there are laws that prohibit physical assistance in a chosen death, you have to physically be able to procure, assemble, and operate the equipment unassisted. The method of self-deliverance that we teach is the inert gas method, which I think is, it's very fast, it's comfortable, it's very reliable. But you have to have a cylinder of gas. You have to be able to attach a regulator. It's not a huge amount of strength, but it is a little bit. A little bit of dexterity is required. Also, thinking about choosing to end one's own life is much easier in the abstract. And it is a difficult choice to make psychologically. So, particularly for individuals facing dementia, um, as one progresses through dementia, self-awareness can start to fade, and it's very easy to miss what we call your window of opportunity. You have to have the cognitive focus, the cognitive energy, for lack of a better term, to be able to make that choice and organize it. So, because choice in dying is really so difficult in this country, you kind of have to go early. I would say, particularly if you're faced with dementia, but also if you're faced with some of the neurodegenerative diseases, one should plan on leaving a little good life on the table just to make sure that you don't wait too long. I wish it weren't so. It seems like one cruelty on top of another. Um, but for those people who really want to control their ending, I think that's an important consideration.
There are also many people in hospice that, as we said, don't have access to MAID, don't have, maybe because of legal issues or financial. How does Final Exit work with hospice care in these situations?
Interestingly, we don't.
Okay.
Um, we do, and let me qualify that a little bit. We absolutely think hospice is wonderful. They are great at keeping people comfortable, treating symptoms, working with the family. We often encourage callers as well as Exit Guide program clients, if they qualify, to get on hospice and get that support. Because our society is conflicted about choice in dying, what the Exit Guide program does, as I said, it is outside of the medical system. We are not covered by the medical aid in dying umbrella. So individuals who are choosing to end their lives outside the medical system, that is still considered suicide in legal parlance. And so hospice volunteers, hospice nurses, doctors tend to be mandated reporters. So it puts them in an uncomfortable position. Even if they fully support choice in dying and respect an individual's choice to hasten their death, it's better that they not know that you plan to do that outside the medical system. A, because it does put them in an awkward position, and or if they did object, they could call the authorities, and you could get a welfare check from somebody with a loaded firearm.
Your program, the Exit Guide program, what is the process to be accepted into that program?
So anyone who is interested in Exit Guide support would reach out to us either through our website or our toll-free number. They would talk to one of our volunteer coordinators. That's the volunteer position where they answer everybody's questions, and then for people who are appropriate for the guide program, sort of shepherd them through the application process. We ask that people write a personal statement. So we hear from them in their own words. What are your diagnoses? How do they impact your quality of life? Because for us, that's really important. It's not just diagnosis, it's what impact does it have on your quality of life? What are your values as it relates to end of life choice? And what is it you want from us? Then we ask for medical records to substantiate what you're saying in your personal statement. We have a questionnaire that's designed to get at issues of like medical frailty. And then we'll have another one of our volunteers do kind of an informational interview to get a little bit more of a big picture of the applicant's situation. That all goes to our medical review committee, which is a multidisciplinary team of individuals who review the application to make sure that the individual meets our medical criteria. And if so, then the person would qualify for guide assignment. The guides would then ensure, while working with the individual, that this person meets all of our, what we call our general criteria. Person must be competent, must be an adult. They must be aware of their alternatives. So even if medically all that's left to you is palliative care, if you're going to end your life with us, we want to know that you knew what other options you could have chosen. We also need to know that your closest loved ones are aware of and not opposed to your choice to end your life. We respect your autonomy, and we also respect your relationships. And we try to honor both. As you might imagine, these are not always easy bedfellows, but a large part of what we also want to do is not only help individuals, but also try to normalize choice in dying in society. And if we are leaving behind loved ones who are shocked, who are angry, who are suffering from complicated grief, that would really be antithetical to that mission. So those are our other criteria, as well as the one that I mentioned earlier. You have to be physically able to do everything yourself.
What kind of support do you offer the family, the loved ones of the person who does go through this process?
So that's sort of an interesting question. In one sense, our exit guides are there to really support the individual in choice in dying and to plan it. That said, our exit guides have so many conversations with the individual as well as with the close family members. And we have found that those can be very therapeutic. We do really put in time in our process for chatting with people, seeing how they feel about it, giving family members time to get used to it, to air concerns, to ask questions, to say goodbyes. So, in a formal sense, we're not set up, we're not counselors, that's not what we do. But we do a lot of talking. And our experience has been that just in and of itself tends to be very therapeutic.
How long does the process take from, when you first apply to the guide program to when you could actually have the choice and the assistance?
Mhm. Well, I avoid the word assist because that's specifically what is illegal. Um, but we ask that people wait to apply until they're within 6 months to a year of wanting to hasten their death. There's a little bit of a Goldilocks balance. Um, but also don't wait till you're ready to go because that's going to be too late. If everything is really clear and your family is really supportive and you are ready to go, it's still going to be at least 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks between application to exit. That would be pretty quick. And as a practical matter, most cases go considerably longer than that, in part because once people are on the process and or they have their equipment, they relax. It's one of the blessings of what we
Mm.
do. It's really easy to want something you think you can't have. And then when the guides show up and say, okay, here's how you do it. Now you have it. Now you can put the equipment in your closet and get on with your life. And then when you're ready to exit, call us back.
Mm. Makes
So,
sense. How about people whose primary medical condition is something like depression or another mental illness?
mm. So we do not accept applications that are based upon a mental health complaint.
Mm.
That doesn't mean you can't have a mental health issue in your medical record. Half the country does. And I joke that the other half probably should. So that's not a problem for us. But you do need to have a physical illness in the medical record. It's tough for us. We do, as I said, everybody who volunteers for Final Exit Network really respects personal autonomy. But we do have to operate within the society in which we live. And this society really doesn't recognize mental health complaints at the same level
Mm.
as other diagnoses yet. And we're already pushing society's boundaries. So that was just tough for us.
I know that we spoke before about planning and documenting one's wishes regarding end of life decisions, and you had a great experience that you told us about, talking about and filling out the advanced directive at age 16, which, wow, that's amazing. I recommend anyone who's over 18 actually take and have one, because people don't realize that as soon as you go off to college or you go else, your parents don't have access because of HIPAA to everything. And if something happens to you, it'll be more difficult for them. So at age 18, I say, have that discussion, have those conversations, and fill out the forms. How does Final Exit Network assist individuals in ensuring that their end of life wishes are respected, especially for those that might lose their competence due to conditions like dementia, but who have either filled out a post or filled out an advance directive, or even have done that and have a video also.
Yeah, people are using videos more and more as a tool to express what their values are. I think it can be a really helpful tool. So people who have questions about that sort of end of life paperwork can also get in touch with us via the website or our 866 number. Our coordinators can direct people, help them find their state's advance directive forms, which usually include a form that allows you to appoint a healthcare representative. So we can help people find those forms, teach them why this matters. Obviously, we can't tell them how to fill that out. That has to be their own personal choices, but we can explain what these things mean so that they understand what they're filling out. We do often really emphasize the importance of appointing a healthcare representative, perhaps even more than the advance directive, because at the end of the day, having somebody by the bedside screaming on your behalf is going to be more effective than a piece of paper, always. It is It's a big responsibility, and in thinking about who you're gonna choose, this is not a popularity contest.
Mm.
Your spouse may not be the best person for that role, especially if you're quite elderly. Your spouse may be as well and may not be physically able to stand by the bedside and go toe to toe with an emergency room doctor. You want someone who has perhaps a bit of pit bull in them. Um, and as we said earlier, this is somebody you really want to educate about how difficult it will be to turn that super tanker of the medical system, and that if they are in a position where they are speaking for you, that it's not going to be easy. They're going to get a lot of pushback. And so I think that's really important. We also have written, and many other organizations have written as well, a supplemental directive that one can attach to your standard advance directive, specifically for dementia.
Mm.
And I think on our website, maybe under the services tab, if you look for advanced directives for dementia, we have a web page just briefly describing it with a link to a few of them that we think are particularly user friendly. Given our focus on choice in dying, the advanced directives for dementia that we have focused on are ones that allow an individual to ask their healthcare representative when they reach a point in dementia where they're no longer expressing any interest in food or fluid, to stop feeding them, stop hydrating them,
Mm.
and allow them to die by voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. So this is something that would kick in sort of in very end stage dementia. Um, I know earlier we talked about some of the more active methods that you might choose, whether that's the guide program or voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. Those pathways all have to happen while you're still competent. So those would have to happen in early stage dementia. So notably, there is kind of what researcher Dina Davis calls the missing middle. Once you enter moderate stage dementia, there aren't, at least currently, any good pathways except for medical choices for your healthcare representative to make if you wish to hasten death. The dementia directives are interesting. Regular advance directives are clearly established in statute and law. The dementia directives have been sort of building over time. Some earlier versions were kind of tested in court. It wasn't really clear where they would hold up. I don't believe any of the modern versions of dementia directives have really been strongly tested in court, but we as an organization are interested in seeing that happen. And in a case where somebody clearly signed a dementia directive calling for voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, and the residential facility where they're living is refusing to honor that, if their healthcare representative comes to us and says, hey, I'm having trouble getting them to honor this, we might be available to provide legal support and help ensure that that person's wishes are being honored.
Yeah, that having that right person is so important, because even with the regular advanced directives, that could just fly, everything on there could fly out the window as soon as, you know, a son, a daughter, someone else says, no, we want mom or dad to be alive. So having those discussions, not only with not one, but two healthcare advocates for you, or representatives, because you always need a backup, but with the family, is really important, and those are tough conversations to have, sometimes heated conversations, but they're necessary, very necessary, especially if you want to ensure that your end of life is what you want it to be, that quality of life.
I would say you should be having those conversations so much that your family members are rolling their eyes when you bring it up. It will make it easier at the end. And it's not enough to say, I don't want to live like that. It's not clear enough, but you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if person A is your legally appointed healthcare representative. If another relative comes in and says, oh no, she would absolutely have wanted that treatment, she would not have wanted to whatever, it's going to at least delay things. So,
Yeah.
and it's just stressful for the family. Like if everybody has really been brought up to speed, it's much easier for everybody.
Have you ever been in a position where you were helping someone and um, there was refusal from the family members that they didn't want, so there was not agreement between the family member and the person who wanted self-deliverance? They wanted to make decisions for themselves. And if you got into that situation, during, I know that beforehand, you have that discussion and you won't accept to help, you won't help people. Not that you won't help people, but you won't, you won't go through the entire process with people who they family members that don't agree, that they're not aligned. But have you ever been put in a position where you're actually in the moment and there is a lot of angst with the family and they just don't want this to happen?
I've never had that happen at what we would call an exit visit,
Mm.
or even really at an education visit. If there's going to be opposition, it tends, I'll find that out earlier when I'm having family members call me, and or if a family member flat out refuses to call me. That's another um, a problem for us. And it isn't so much that people have to be in agreement. I've had relatives who were not happy about the client's choice, who might have been a little angry about it, who thought it was the wrong choice and or who thought it was a sin,
Mm.
but who respected the client's right to make that choice. And those situations are fine. It's not ideal. It's much nicer when everyone is supportive. It makes just for a nicer experience for everybody. But when somebody is really rabidly opposed, at that point, we can't proceed. There's just too many legal questions. It's so easy to accuse us of coercion or misleading somebody or assistance. So in a situation like that, we'd have to pull back. But that typically happens well before the education visit.
The narrative around the right to die is evolving, of course. Based on your experience, how has public perception changed regarding the rights of individuals with severe degenerative diseases to shape their end of life journey? Have you seen a big change in the last few years?
Actually kind of interesting time, because there's 2 changes I'm seeing. There's the larger international as well as national narrative that we're all watching, where there seems to be increased polarization and sectarianism, um, which seems to be creating a dialogue that is much more black and white and lacking in nuance. So that doesn't bode well for choice in dying. On the other hand, we are also seeing a society in which more and more of us are witnessing endings that we think are horrible, whether that is an over medicated, under palliated medical drama, or a descent into dementia and institutionalization, or even the less dramatic but grueling years long dwindling into debility. So many of us are witnessing these and thinking, wow, I do not want that for myself. So I feel as though there is a growing understanding of why a rational, competent adult who is taking care of him or herself would make this choice. So more and more people get it. And yet there's also this polarization, and how those two forces are going to interact together really remains to be seen.
You mentioned Switzerland. Are there any other countries that do this well?
So there's a number of countries that do it well. What's interesting about Switzerland is Swiss law allows foreigners to come. So Canada has a pretty compassionate law about choice in dying, but you have to qualify for the Canadian medical system. So yes, Americans would love to be able to just hop over the border and take advantage of Canada's quite generous medical aid in dying system, but we can't. We have to go to Switzerland. Certainly the Netherlands, I think Belgium. There's a number of countries that have been doing this for many, many years, and it seems to be much more socially understood. And certainly a greater percentage of their deaths are medically chosen deaths. It's still a pretty small percentage, but you do see that people get much more comfortable with it, and it doesn't go spiraling into, death panels and things like that. It is people want control of their end of life, and it does seem to be reasonably well controlled.
And I talked to someone in Amsterdam yesterday, and um, he was fascinated by what I do as an end of life doula. Um, and he was fascinated because he's like, these conversations that you're talking about grieving, about dying, and having autonomy, they're so non-issues. They're non-issues here. And he thought that it was he was so interested and curious, and he's like, I had no idea. I had no idea that in America, uh, you guys have such a difficult time even talking about death, and so.
Even talking about it, and even when you look at statistics of medical aid in dying in states that have medical aid in dying and compare percentages of the population that take advantage of it based on sort of size, and then you look at, say, the numbers in Canada or Switzerland or Belgium, it is a tiny percentage of Americans who access it. People don't know about it. Healthcare practitioners don't know about it, or if they do know about it, they don't know the details, or if they do know some of the details, they've never written a prescription themselves. So for people who might want medical aid in dying, they can't find a healthcare practitioner who's willing to prescribe. Um, there's hurdle after hurdle in this country.
So, talking about education and educating people, how do you do outreach? How does Final Exit do outreach? And not only to the general public, but how do you educate doctors? Do you even? I mean, that might not be part of what Final Exit does, but it's an interesting question because doctors, death
Well,
isn't
doctors,
isn't what
they
they
don't
like to
talk about
talk
death.
about.
Right. Well, there's lots of books talking about how healthcare practitioners, many, need a little bit of education on how to talk about death. Again, coming up with that dichotomy, how choice in dying outside the medical system is still sort of considered, legally speaking, suicide. We don't put a lot of effort into educating healthcare practitioners. We do ask every applicant how they hear about Final Exit Network, how do they learn about the guide program. Every now and then, someone will say, "Oh, my doctor mentioned you guys." Uh, and that's a stretch for a doctor, right? That is sort of crossing some professional lines. But obviously somebody comes, they've got early stage dementia, and they say, "Doc, I don't want to live this way." And doc says, "I wouldn't either. I can't help you, but here's some people who can." Um, we do make more of an effort to reach the general public. We do some speaking. Obviously, our coordinators are answering questions for anybody who reaches out to us. But I also think that a lot of how we hopefully shift some of society's dialogue is through the guide program. It's a pretty small scale, but in talking to loved ones and families, and they're deeply involved with their loved ones' process and journey, it becomes really real to them. And they go on and they tell other people. And that word of mouth of normal people with normal families who love their loved ones and are not like demons, and people start thinking differently about it. They're like, "Oh, well, Nancy's mom did that. That I guess maybe that's not so crazy." And I think that's slowly what can really help shift how people think about it.
I know VSED is legal in all states, and MAID is in 11 states. And if you do, I know if you opt in for medical aid in dying, that on your death certificate, it says the disease that you were dying from, because that's actually what you were dying from. Um, and then you get your life insurance. And I hate to talk about something financial like that, but there are a lot of questions. When I told a friend that I was talking to you today, he's like, what would that do to your life insurance policy if you do something like that? I think with the VSED, if you're in hospice, and don't quote me on this, maybe you know, but if you do VSED, don't you also, your life insurance isn't affected because it's part of the disease and you're just stopping. Yeah, I don't know, but I know with medical aid and dying, you're definitely your life insurance is covered. How, if you opt into some of these other methods, do you know, in states that don't do medical aid and dying, do you know how that affects, like what would show up on your death certificate? Would it be suicide that shows up on your death certificate?
So you're correct. In a medical aid and dying state, if you fall under that umbrella, the way the law is written, cause of death is the underlying disease. For voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, I don't think it's quite as clear. If one is concerned about a life insurance policy, it's worth checking. I think it depends a little bit on the hospice doctor. Like so many things, it shouldn't be hit or miss who you're working with, but I think it is. In terms of some of the do it yourself methods, such as the use of inert gas that we teach, where the cause of death is, it's clearly known, it was clearly a chosen death, and it was outside the medical system. The cause of death would be, in the case of inert gas, it would be asphyxiation, and the manner of death would be suicide.
Mm.
Obviously, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There are no legal implications outside of the health of the life insurance that would come into play. And even life insurance, at least for Final Exit Network, is almost never an issue. Um, and I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is that most life insurance policies have a contestability clause that's like a year or 2 years long. Um, that if something comes up in that 1 or 2 year period, it's presumed that you made a material misrepresentation in your application. So if you end your life within a year or two of taking out your policy, it's presumed that that was your intent, that your application was therefore fraudulent, and they can refund your premiums and not honor the policy. As a practical matter, anybody who is applying to Final Exit Network is probably older. They're not really in the age bracket where they would be taking out a life insurance policy for young kids or whatever. They've also probably been sick for a while. And so if you're applying for life insurance, you have to disclose your ailments. And so you probably wouldn't qualify for life insurance anyway. Now, if you have a life insurance policy that is past the contestability clause, my understanding is it is still valid.
Can you talk about the role of volunteers in Final Exit Network?
Volunteers are everything. They do pretty much everything. The entire guide program is volunteers. We have 3 employees. We have an executive director, we have a membership director, and then I'm the exit guide program director. But when you call the organization, the people answering the phone are volunteers, the people doing interviews are volunteers, our medical review committee is volunteers, our exit guides are all volunteers. They're the heart of the organization.
It is a tough thing to volunteer for. I could only imagine. Um, what is the most challenging aspect of the work of the volunteer, of your work with Final Exit Network? Because you've had lots of experience volunteering.
There are lots of challenges, certainly, and I'm thinking of different challenges at different times. I do. And of course, some of the challenging things are also gratifying. I mean, working with family members who are a little queasy about this idea is definitely challenging, but can also be really gratifying. I think what I find the hardest, the most emotionally difficult is, as I said, laws prohibit physical assistance. And we get a number of calls from people who are clearly physically debilitated enough that they aren't able to throw around a tank or touch a regulator. And it is really hard to be on the phone with somebody who is clearly suffering, who is clearly ready to go, who has every right to choose to quickly and safely end their own life. And I often, especially in my role as the guide program director, I have to step in and say, I'm sorry, I've reviewed your application. It's really clear you can't physically do this. and the only method left to you is voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. It is such a painful message to have to deliver that that's hard. We are forced by law to be biased against the physically disabled, and
Yeah,
that's tough to live with.
I see a lot more movement with dementia patients, with that coming to the surface, and as you said, that the addendum that you have. So there's a lot more work with the dementia, much less with people that have that physical disability, ALS, MS. Do you see that that will gain traction? I know yeah.
I don't know. Things like ALS, MS, Parkinson's, those individuals can qualify for medical aid in dying toward the end stages of the disease. It's a little bit more difficult sometimes for them to find a practitioner who will be willing to prescribe, but they could fall under the medical aid in dying umbrella. For individuals who are simply really debilitated, but they do not have a terminal illness, even if they're within sort of 6 months of death, anybody takes a look at them and thinks, this is not going to be long. If they don't have a terminal illness, they don't qualify for medical aid in dying. And so individuals who are in that position, you can be pretty physically debilitated for a long time in a nursing home for years. But if you're not able to procure, assemble, and operate the equipment, we can't support you. And no, in terms of your initial question, I don't see social movement on that issue anytime soon. Hopefully, I'm wrong, but I think there's enough nuance there. A lot of these laws, I suspect, I have no idea. I'm just making stuff up at this point, but there's, and for very good reason, a lot of interest in protecting vulnerable individuals, particularly the young who might be impulsive. So I think that's some of what these laws prohibiting assistance had in mind, was to protect these individuals, but the great irony there is the 20-year-old doesn't need physical assistance. It's the 90-year-old who does.
I know that we are almost out of time. Is there any other message or any other words of advice that you would like to provide?
In terms of advice, some of the themes that you touched on very early, especially that you work on with your clients, talk early, talk often, talk to your friends, talk to your family. I mean, I do think that that is how social change happens. I think there is a lot of assumptions. As soon as the people hear the word suicide, it just brings up all sorts of knee-jerk reactions. And there is a lot of nuance there. We absolutely want to avoid anybody making a tragic, rash decision. And at the same time, I think most of us really recognize that there are a lot of conditions that for many of us we would consider worse than death. And so hastening one's own death can actually be a very loving, self-compassionate choice. And so making space for that nuance would be wonderful.
Thank you. Lowrey, thank you so much for your time and for your experience and your stories. For anyone who wants to learn more or who wants to get in touch with the Final Exit Network, how can they find you?
Probably the best way to reach us, modern world, is our website, which is finalexitnetwork.org. And we also have a toll-free number, which is 866-654-9156.
Folks, as we close today's episode, I want to acknowledge once more the sensitivity and the potential triggers in our discussion. This journey towards understanding end of life choices is profound and challenging. Please ensure that you're taking care of yourself, seeking support, and reaching out if you need to. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions or wish to share your thoughts, please comment below or reach out to me directly. If you found today's discussion helpful, I encourage you to like, share, comment, and subscribe. This is Traci Arieli from Comforting Closure, wishing you peace and comfort on your journey. Until next time, take care.